Utah's deserts, canyons, and mountains hide traces of ancient lives that still raise more questions than answers. From cliffside granaries and rock art panels to forgotten shelters and unexplained stone features, these landscapes hold stories shaped by survival, belief, and change. Each site offers a quiet mystery waiting to be explored through what remains etched into stone and earth. Range Creek Canyon ruins sit quietly on the eastern edge of Utah's Buckhorn Cliffs, a place that feels deliberately hidden. Even today, reaching it takes effort. Long dirt roads, steep canyon walls, and wide stretches of silence make it clear why this area remained largely untouched for so long. For centuries, people passed nearby without realizing that one of the best preserved ancient landscapes in the American West was right there, sealed off by geography and luck. What makes Range Creek different isn't just what's there, it's what hasn't happened to it. For most of the 20th century, looters never reached this canyon. Roads didn't cut through it, farms didn't level it, developments skipped over it entirely. As a result, when archaeologists finally gained access in the early 2000s, they walked into something close to a time capsule. Granaries still held corncobs, footprints remained in the dust of rock shelters, and stone tools lay where they were dropped hundreds of years ago. In the American Southwest, that level of preservation is almost unheard of. The ruins scattered throughout Range Creek belong primarily to the Fremont culture, a group that lived across what is now Utah from roughly 300 to 1300 CE. The Fremont are already mysterious on their own. They don't fit neatly into the better-known ancestral Puebloan story to the south. Their architecture varies wildly. Their art shifts from place to place. Their subsistence strategies blend farming with hunting in ways that suggest flexibility rather than rigid tradition. Range Creek captures all of that complexity in one narrow canyon. Walking through the area today, you encounter dozens of granaries tucked into cliffsome no larger than a refrigerator. Others carefully built with stone walls, mud, mortar, and small openings just big enough to slide an arm through. These weren't homes, they were storage vaults. Corn, seeds, and tools were kept high above the canyon floor, safe from animals and floods. The sheer number of them suggests long-term planning and a deep understanding of the landscape. This wasn't a temporary stop. People expected to return season after season. Below those granaries are pit houses, shallow circular or rectangular dwellings dug into the earth. Many show signs of repeated use. Hearths are layered, floors were repaired, walls were reinforced. Families lived here, cooked here, raised children here, and then at some point they left. That departure is the core mystery of Range Creek. There's no evidence of violent destruction, no burned villages, no mass graves, no signs of sudden collapse. Instead, the sites appear to have been slowly abandoned. Food stores were left behind, tools remained in place. It feels less like a panicked escape and more like a decision made over time. But why walk away from a place that clearly worked? One theory points to climate. Around the late 1200s, the region experienced extended droughts. Farming corn in high desert environments is always a gamble, and even small shifts in rainfall could have tipped the balance. Another possibility is social change. The Fremont weren't a single unified group. They were small communities connected by trade and shared ideas. If neighboring groups migrated or merged into other cultures, Range Creek's residents may have followed, slowly dissolving into broader populations. There is also the idea that Range Creek was a seasonal or specialized location rather than a permanent homeland. Some archaeologists suggest it functioned as a storage and hunting hub used by people who lived elsewhere part of the year. If trade routes shifted or food strategies changed, the canyon may have simply lost its purpose. Yet none of these explanations fully account for the care evident in the structures left behind. These weren't hastily built facilities meant to be disposable. The granaries alone represent enormous labor investment. Building them required climbing sheer rock faces, hauling materials upward, and sealing them against weather. People don't usually abandon that kind of work unless something significant changes. Adding to the mystery are the rock art panels scattered along the canyon walls. Some show classic Fremont imagery, trapezoidal human figures, animals, and abstract shapes. Others feel out of place, stylistically different, as if multiple generations or even different groups left their marks. There's no clear narrative sequence. Instead, the art feels layered, almost conversational, spanning centuries. What's striking is how ordinary much of it feels. This isn't a site dominated by grand monuments or ceremonial plazas. It's a lived-in landscape. You can stand in a shelter and imagine someone crouched there, shaping a stone point, listening to wind move through the canyon. That intimacy makes the abandonment harder to accept. It feels personal. The modern rediscovery of Range Creek is a story in itself. For decades, the canyon was privately owned by a ranching family that quietly protected it. They noticed artifacts but didn't disturb them. They kept outsiders away. When the land was eventually sold to the state of Utah, archaeologists were stunned by what they found. Entire sections of Fremont life preserved in situ, something many had assumed no longer existed anywhere. Since then, research has been intentionally cautious. Excavation is limited. Many sites are documented but left untouched. The goal isn't to extract every artifact, but to preserve the canyon as a whole system. In a way, Range Creek has become a lesson in restraint, showing how much knowledge can survive when places are allowed to remain quiet. Visiting today, you're struck by how unchanged it feels. The canyon is still remote. Access is controlled. You don't wander freely among the ruins. Much of it can only be seen through guided research or from a respectful distance. That limitation can be frustrating, but it also preserves the sense that this place isn't finished telling its story. Standing there, it's hard not to wonder if the mystery of Range Creek isn't about disappearance at all, but transformation. The people didn't vanish. They adapted, they moved, they became part of other communities, whose descendants still live across the region today. What remains is a snapshot, not an ending. In the present day, Range Creek Canyon is protected as one of Utah's most important archaeological preserves. It's largely closed to casual tourism, which has helped keep it intact. That protection has preserved both its strengths and its limitations. On one hand, the sites remain remarkably untouched. On the other, much of what could be learned will likely stay unanswered intentionally. So, my own view is that Range Creek's power lies in that uncertainty. It resists clean conclusions. It reminds us that ancient lives were complex, practical, and responsive to change. Not every mystery needs a dramatic collapse or catastrophic event. Sometimes people simply make a quiet decision to go elsewhere, leaving behind a place that still remembers them long after they've gone. The Maconi Ranch petroglyphs sit in northeastern Utah, just outside Vernal, in a landscape that looks calm and open at first glance. Rolling hills, scrub grass, weathered rock outcrops, and long sightlines give it an almost pastoral feel. Nothing about the setting prepares you for what's carved into the stone. Then you step closer to the cliffs, and the path suddenly feels crowded. The Maconi Ranch petroglyphs form one of the densest and most intriguing rock art concentrations in Utah. Hundreds of figures are etched into dark desert varnish, exposed where the rock face catches the light just right. Some are immediately recognizable. Others feel strange, even unsettling. Together, they create a visual language that no one has fully learned how to read. Most of the carvings are attributed to the Fremont culture, dating roughly between 600 and 1300 CE. But like much of Fremont history, the attribution isn't always clean. Styles overlap, motifs repeat, and then suddenly change. Some figures look carefully planned, while others seem spontaneous, as if added in passing. This layering suggests that Maconi Ranch wasn't a single use. It was revisited, reused, and reinterpreted over generations. The most striking images are the anthropomorphic figures. Many have trapezoidal bodies, broad shoulders tapering down to narrow waists. Some have no arms. Others have exaggerated limbs or bent elbows. Faces are sometimes blank, sometimes marked with dots or lines. A few appear to wear headdresses or horn-like shapes. These figures don't look like portraits, they feel symbolic, as if representing roles, states of being, or ideas rather than individuals. Animals appear alongside them. Bighorn sheep are common, carved with curved horns and sturdy bodies. There are deer, birds, and creatures that are harder to classify. In some panels, humans and animals seem to interact. In others, they exist side by side without clear connection. Whether these scenes depict hunting, spiritual relationships, or storytelling remains an open question. What makes Maconi Ranch particularly mysterious is the repetition of certain symbols, whose meaning has been debated for decades. Spiral shapes appear frequently, carved deeply and deliberately. Grids and ladder-like patterns show up in multiple locations. Some researchers suggest these represent migration, water sources, or seasonal cycles. Others argue they could be ceremonial markers or teaching tools. There's no single interpretation that fits every example. One of the most discussed figures is a large abstract anthropomorph, sometimes nicknamed the shield figure. Its body is wide and blocky with minimal detail, almost as if the artist wanted to emphasize form over realism. Similar figures appear in other Fremont sites, but the Maconi examples are especially prominent. Some scholars think these may represent ancestral beings or mythic figures rather than humans. Others believe they reflect altered states of consciousness, possibly linked to ritual or vision experiences. Standing in front of these carvings, what's striking is their scale. Many are larger than life, carved at eye level or higher. This wasn't casual doodling. Creating these images required time, effort, and intent. Someone stood here repeatedly striking stone against stone, slowly revealing each line. That act alone suggests importance. Unlike cave art hidden deep in shelters, Maconi's petroglyphs are exposed. They face outward, visible from the surrounding landscape. This raises an important question. Who were they meant for? Were they messages to others passing through the area? Markers of territory? Records meant to be revisited by the same community? Or were they meant for something less tangible, like spirits, ancestors, or forces tied to the land itself? The location itself offers clues. Maconi Ranch sits near natural travel routes, close to water sources and open grazing areas. It would have been a logical gathering place, a crossroads where groups met, traded, or paused during seasonal movement. Rock art in such places often serves multiple purposes, functioning as memory, instruction, and identity all at once. Another layer of mystery comes from the absence of clear chronological order. Some carvings appear older, weathered, and softened by time. Others are sharper, their lines still crisp. This suggests centuries of use. Yet, there's no clear progression from simple to complex, or from one theme to another. Instead, the imagery feels cyclical, as if later artists were responding to earlier ones, rather than replacing them. There's also the question of why Maconi Ranch became such a focal point. Fremont sites exist across Utah, but not all feature this density of rock art. Something about this place mattered. It may have held spiritual significance, served as a meeting ground, or marked a boundary between groups. Without written records, we're left to infer meaning from placement, repetition, and context. What's notably missing is any sign of European contact imagery. No horses, no crosses, no firearms. That absence helps anchor the site firmly in a pre-contact world. The messages carved here belong entirely to the people who lived with the land as it was before. Outside pressures reshaped the region. Modern interaction with the site adds another complicated layer. For years, Maconi Ranch was known locally, but not heavily promoted. As awareness grew, so did visitation. Some panels showed damage from touching, chalking, or careless behavior. That damage changes how the art reads. Lines fade, context is lost. Preservation efforts have improved, but the tension between access and protection remains. Visiting the site today, you're struck by how close everything feels. There's no barrier between you and the carvings. You can stand inches away and trace the shapes with your eyes. That closeness is powerful, but it also highlights how fragile the connection is. One careless act can erase something that survived 1,000 years. What stays with you isn't just the imagery, but the silence around it. The land has unchanged much. Wind still moves through the grass. Light still hits the rock at the same angles. In those moments, it's easy to imagine someone standing here long ago, choosing what to carve and where. My own impression of Maconi Ranch is that it functions less like a story and more like a conversation, one that unfolded slowly across generations. Each carving responds to what came before, adding without fully explaining. The mystery isn't meant to be solved quickly, or maybe at all. Today, Maconi Ranch remains one of Utah's most accessible yet enigmatic rock art sites. Its openness is both its strength and its vulnerability. We can see it, study it, and feel its presence, but we may never fully understand what it was meant to say. And perhaps that's the point. The petroglyphs don't offer a single answer. They offer evidence of thought, belief, and identity carved into stone. They remind us that ancient people were not simple or silent. They had ideas worth preserving, even if those ideas now speak in a language we can only partially hear. Buckhorn Wash cuts through the heart of eastern Utah's San Rafael Swell, a rugged landscape shaped by erosion, time, and long stretches of isolation. The wash itself feels quiet and open, bordered by low cliffs and desert scrub. But the canyon walls hold one of the most extensive and visually striking collections of rock art in the region, stretching for hundreds of feet along the rock face. The Buckhorn Wash rock art panels read less like a single site and more like a long unfolding record of human presence. What makes Buckhorn Wash unique isn't just the number of carvings, it's this sense that this place was returned to again and again over centuries by different people with different reasons for leaving their marks. Standing in front of the panels, you're not looking at one moment in time. You're looking at layers of history stacked on top of each other, sometimes literally carved over older images. The earliest images are generally attributed to the Barrier Canyon style, also known as the Pectels River style. These figures are immediately recognizable. Tall, elongated, human-like forms dominate the stone, often with narrow bodies, broad shoulders, and hollow-looking eyes. Many lack arms or legs. Some appear to float rather than stand. Their faces are often expressionless, giving them an almost ghost-like presence. Even without knowing their age, they feel ancient. These figures don't tell obvious stories. They aren't hunting scenes or daily activities. Instead, they feel symbolic, even otherworldly. Some researchers believe they represent spiritual beings, shamans, or visions experienced during altered states of consciousness. Others argue they are clan ancestors or mythic figures tied to cosmology. What's clear is that they weren't meant to depict ordinary life. Later additions to the panels come from Fremont and Ute traditions. These carvings introduce more recognizable imagery. Bighorn sheep appear frequently, carved with curved horns and sturdy bodies. Human figures become smaller and more active, sometimes holding weapons or appearing in hunting scenes. Footprints, handprints, and abstract symbols fill the spaces between figures, creating a dense visual field that rewards slow observation. What's striking is how these different styles coexist. Newer carvings do uncompletely erase the older ones. In many cases, artists worked around existing images, respecting their presence even while adding something new. This suggests continuity rather than replacement. Buckhorn Wash wasn't abandoned and rediscovered, it remained meaningful across generations and cultures. The scale of the panels adds to their impact. This isn't a hidden site tucked into a narrow alcove. The rock art stretches along an exposed cliff, visible from a distance. Anyone traveling through the wash would have seen it. That visibility raises an important question. Who was this art for? One possibility is that Buckhorn Wash functioned as a landmark or gathering place. The wash follows a natural travel corridor through the swell, making it a logical route for seasonal movement, trade, or hunting. Rock art in such locations often serves as a marker, signaling territory, shared beliefs, or communal memory. These images may have been meant to be seen, recognized, and remembered. Another possibility is that the panels acted as a teaching space. Some scenes appear instructional, showing animals, tools, or repeated patterns. The act of carving itself could have been part of passing down knowledge, with younger generations learning not just what the symbols meant but how to create them. There's also a ceremonial interpretation. The Barrier Canyon figures, in particular, don't lend themselves to practical explanation. Their scale and abstraction suggest ritual significance. The repetition of certain forms hints at shared belief systems that extended beyond a single family or group. Despite decades of study, no single interpretation fully explains the site. That ambiguity is part of what keeps Buckhorn Wash compelling. The panels resist simplification. They don't resolve into a neat narrative with a beginning and end. Instead, they feel like an ongoing dialogue between people and place. The physical process of creating the art adds another layer to the mystery. Petroglyphs were made by pecking through dark desert varnish to reveal lighter stone beneath. This takes time, effort, and intention. Some figures are deeply carved with clean, confident lines. Others are lighter, almost tentative. This variation suggests different artists, different skill levels, and different purposes. Environmental context matters, too. The San Rafael swell is harsh and unpredictable. Water is scarce. Temperatures swing dramatically. Choosing to spend time carving stone here wasn't incidental, it meant stopping, staying, and engaging with the landscape. The rock face itself becomes part of the message, shaped by sunlight, shadow, and weather. Modern visitors often notice how the panels change throughout the day. In the morning or late afternoon, low-angle light makes the carvings stand out sharply. At midday they can nearly disappear. That interaction with light may not be accidental. The art reveals itself slowly, depending on time and perspective. Like many accessible rock art sites, Buckhorn Wash has suffered damage in the past. Some visitors chalked the carvings to make them more visible for photographs, permanently altering the stone. Others scratched initials or names nearby. While preservation efforts have improved, those scars remain a reminder of how easily ancient history can be harmed. Today, Buckhorn Wash is protected, but it's still open to the public. You can walk right up to the panels. There are no fences separating you from the art. That closeness is powerful. You're standing where others stood hundreds or even thousands of years ago, looking at the same stone, the same images. What's missing from the site is just as telling as what's present. There are no written explanations, no definitive dates carved into the rock, no final image that signals an ending. The art simply stops at some point, as if the conversation moved elsewhere. From a modern perspective, it's tempting to look for a single meaning or purpose, but Buckhorn Wash resists that impulse. It reminds us that ancient people didn't think in tidy categories. Art, belief, survival, and memory were intertwined. A carving could be spiritual and practical at the same time. It could mark a place and tell a story and honor something unseen. Visiting Buckhorn Wash today, the experience feels surprisingly intimate. Cars pass nearby, the road is close, and yet the art holds its ground. It doesn't fade into the background. It demands attention, patience, and respect. My own impression is that Buckhorn Wash functions less as a message and more as a presence. It doesn't explain itself because it wasn't meant to. It was meant to exist, to anchor people to a place, to remind them of who came before and what mattered enough to carve into stone. In the present day, Buckhorn Wash stands as one of Utah's most important open-air rock art galleries. Its accessibility is both a gift and a challenge. It allows people to connect directly with deep history, but it also asks for restraint. The art survived because it endured silence, distance, and time. The mystery of Buckhorn Wash isn't about decoding every symbol. It's about recognizing that meaning doesn't always translate cleanly across centuries. Sometimes the most honest response is to stand quietly, let the stone speak in its own way, and accept that some stories remain incomplete by design. Hogup Cave opens along the western edge of Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, carved into a limestone ridge that overlooks a landscape most people would struggle to survive in today. Salt flats stretch outward, broken by marshes, shifting shorelines, and long distances between reliable water sources. At first glance, it feels like an unlikely place for sustained human activity. And yet, Hogup Cave tells a story that reaches back thousands of years, challenging assumptions about where and how early people lived. The cave itself isn't dramatic in size. It's a shallow rock shelter, rather than a deep cavern wide enough to offer protection from wind and sun, but open enough to stay connected to the outside world. That openness matters. Hogup Cave wasn't a place to disappear into. It was a place to pause, observe, prepare, and return to again and again. Archaeological excavations in the mid-20th century revealed something unexpected. Beneath layers of dust and debris were artifacts spanning an enormous time range, from as early as 6000 BCE to around 1300 CE. That continuity alone makes Hogup Cave extraordinary. Few sites in the Great Basin show such long, repeated use without major gaps. The most famous discoveries from Hogup Cave are its organic artifacts, preserved by the dry environment. Unlike stone tools, organic materials usually decay quickly. At Hogup they survived. Fragments of woven baskets, sandals, cordage, and plant fibers emerged from the soil, offering rare insight into everyday life rather than ceremonial display. Among the most striking finds were moccasins woven from sagebrush bark and animal hide. These were undecorative items. They were practical, durable footwear designed for rough terrain and extreme temperatures. Their design evolved over time, reflecting changes in technology, mobility, and environment. Through them, archaeologists could trace adaptation across millennia. Stone tools were also abundant. Projectile points, scrapers, and cutting tools show shifts in hunting strategies and prey. Early inhabitants relied heavily on small game and gathered resources, while later groups expanded their toolkits, suggesting broader diets and changing environmental conditions. The tools weren't discarded randomly. Many were carefully placed, repaired, or repurposed, indicating long-term familiarity with the site. One of the most puzzling aspects of Hogup Cave is how consistently it was used, despite dramatic changes in the surrounding environment. The Great Salt Lake is not a stable feature. Its size and shoreline have fluctuated dramatically over thousands of years. At times, the cave would have overlooked wetlands, rich in birds, fish, and plants. At other times, it would have faced harsh desert conditions with limited resources. That adaptability points to deep environmental knowledge. The people who used Hogup Cave understood seasonal cycles, animal migration, and plant availability. They weren't merely surviving, they were managing risk in a challenging landscape. The cave functioned as a strategic node, a place that made sense even when conditions shifted. Hogup Cave also complicates the idea of cultural boundaries. Artifacts from different time layers do not belong to a single identifiable culture. Instead, they reflect a sequence of groups associated with the broader Great Basin tradition, later overlapping with Fremont influences. Styles blend rather than replace one another. This suggests continuity through knowledge transfer rather than abrupt population replacement. That blending raises an important question. Was Hogup Cave remembered? Did later groups know they were returning to a place used by their ancestors? Or was the location rediscovered repeatedly because it simply worked? There's no definitive answer, but the repeated use of the same shelter hints at memory passed through generations. Even without written language, unlike rock art sites, Hogup Cave doesn't speak visually. Its story is buried, layered, and quiet. That silence is part of its mystery. Without dramatic carvings or monuments, the site forces attention toward the mundane details of life. How people dressed, how they moved, what they carried, and what they chose to leave behind. One of the most debated aspects of the site is whether Hogup Cave was a permanent residence or a seasonal stop. The evidence suggests it functioned primarily as a temporary shelter used during hunting trips, migration, or resource gathering near the lake. Hearths show repeated use but not the kind of structural investment seen in long-term villages. That makes its long lifespan even more intriguing. For thousands of years, different people made the same decision: this place is worth stopping at. That continuity speaks to geography rather than ideology. The cave sits at a junction of ecological zones where desert, wetland, and upland environments intersect. From here, a group could exploit multiple resources without committing to one. There's also evidence that Hogup Cave played a role in broader movement patterns across the Great Basin. Similar artifacts appear at distant sites, suggesting trade or shared technology. The cave may have functioned as part of a network rather than an isolated refuge, linking groups across large territories. Modern excavation methods, while careful, still raise ethical questions. Many of the artifacts were removed and studied decades ago, before current standards of preservation and indigenous consultation. Today, Hogup Cave is recognized not just as an archaeological site, but as part of a living cultural landscape connected to descendant communities. That recognition has reshaped how the site is treated and discussed. Visiting the area today, the cave feels understated. There are no grand signs or visitor centers. The landscape dominates. Wind moves across the flats. The smell of salt lingers in the air. It's easy to imagine why people would have paused here, using the shelter to escape the elements while keeping watch over the land. What makes Hogup Cave compelling isn't a single unanswered question, but the accumulation of them. How did knowledge survive across such long spans of time? How did people navigate environmental instability without permanent settlements? How much of what we see represents continuity, and how much represents rediscovery? My own impression of Hogup Cave is that it represents endurance rather than mystery in the dramatic sense. It shows how ordinary decisions repeated over generations can leave behind extraordinary records. The people who used this cave weren't trying to create a legacy, they were solving daily problems. And yet, those solutions endured long enough for us to glimpse them thousands of years later. In the present day, Hogup Cave stands as one of Utah's most important Great Basin sites. Not because it offers spectacle, but because it offers perspective. It reminds us that ancient life wasn't defined only by monuments and ceremonies. Much of it unfolded quietly in places chosen for practicality, memory, and survival. The artifacts left behind don't tell us everything. They don't explain belief systems or social structures in full, but they do something just as valuable. They show how people lived with uncertainty, adapted to change, and kept moving forward in a landscape that demanded constant awareness. Hogup Cave doesn't ask to be solved. It asks to be understood on its own terms, as a place where human presence persisted, not through dominance over nature, but through careful balance with it.